What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by your favorite beat reporter, Chris Fedor. What's going on, Chris? How's your day going today?
Ethan, going great. How about you?
Man, just living and learning. Gotta continue to get on. It was a rough day for me at the end when we found out about Willie Mays passing away. I mean, you know, as I am a big baseball guy, I actually grew up wearing 24 as my main number because of Willie Mays, because of Ken Griffey, and obviously it was the backwards of Jackie Robinson. So, been a rough day for me at the end of it, but you know, gotta pay legacy and do the work as he would have wanted. So we're going to get into everything going on. And as we celebrate the passing of Willie Mays, we also want to celebrate life of Evan Mobley. It was his 23rd birthday on Tuesday. And I think that's just another realization of how talented Mobley has been in his first few seasons. I mean, in the NBA, there are few people that come into the league being labeled unicorns, and also understanding that what he's been able to accomplish could pose the Cavs to make him take on a rookie max deal, but also the expectations that come along with that. I mean, he might be the person that they look to, depending on what happens with the Donovan Mitchell deal, to take them to the next step of what the Cavs want to be doing. Or, depending on if Donovan Mitchell stays with the Cavs, he could be considered his running mate, depending on what happens with Darius Garland. See, there's a lot of depending on still going on, Chris, especially in these early stages. But I don't want to get too far into Evan Mobley. Just want to give him a little shout out for his birthday because there's a lot of real hard hitting or real news that came out today, Chris. It was a very cryptic day when it comes to the Cavs organization, and I want to get your thoughts on a few things. So, first and foremost, head coach or former head coach Jamie Bickerstaff went on the radio today and discussed the amount of effort that Luka Doncic put into playing in the playoffs, specifically playing through injury, mentioning getting shots and things of that nature to force himself out onto the court. Previously, when he went on the radio, Bickerstaff talked more about the success of the season after being fired and trying to speak life into the Cavs organization, it felt like. But this most recent time, it seemed like Bickerstaff was more making a reference to Jarrett Allen not being able to play in the playoffs after breaking in or piercing his rib in Game 4 of the first round against the Orlando Magic. So we'll get to more on that a little bit afterwards, but I wanted to get your thoughts about what Bickerstaff said and if you think this will hurt his case to get a job with other organizations.
No, I don't think it's going to hurt his case to get a job elsewhere. I was told by somebody close to JB that he's doing this stuff with Sirius XM radio. One, because of the ties that he has to some of the people there that are hosting the shows. Two, because he has a background in broadcasting. He was an analyst for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And three, because, you know, he was kind of like a special guest during the NBA Finals. In fact, somebody close to JB said that he did not expect to be asked a whole bunch of Cavs questions on his first appearance, the way that he was when he had to address his firing, when he had to address whether the season was a success or not. Look, when you have JB shortly after he's fired, of course the host has to do the job and ask those kinds of questions. But a source close to JB said he was caught off guard by that, and he was just going on Sirius XM NBA radio to talk about the finals and break down in an analyst role everything that was going on in the finals and in the NBA playoffs as a whole. So I think, you know, anytime you have somebody transitioning toward that role, an analyst type role, a guest analyst role, I don't think it's something that's going to be held against them and prevent them from getting an assistant coaching job or something along those lines. Plus, JB has so many ties around the NBA with so many head coaches that they're not going to change their opinion on him. They're not going to look at him as some kind of toxic figure to bring to the organization. I truly expect Jamal Mosley from the Orlando Magic to look into the possibility of bringing JB aboard as an assistant coach. I would expect other guys that JB is close to take a look and see if there's an opening for them to bring in an assistant coach. And if he doesn't, if he decides that he wants to sit out coaching for a year, he wants to just kind of be a dad, he wants to just take the year off, whatever the case may be, I would expect him to get some kind of guest analyst type role, similar to what he was doing with Sirius XM NBA radio, because his resume is strong enough. And a passive aggressive comment, we can call it, about a situation involving Jared Allen and comparing it to Luka Doncic in the situation that he was in, that's not going to change the viewpoint of JB and how good of a coach he is.
And Chris, I mean, we talked about it being cryptic, and you said passive aggressive comment. Sure, when you put it either way, Donovan Mitchell also took to social media to take a little bit of a part in what went on. There have been reports that Donovan Mitchell is playing a part in the Jared Allen trade talks because of how Donovan doesn't want to lose Jared as a teammate. And after Bickerstaff's statements on the radio about Jarrett, Donovan posted on his Instagram story a photo of him and Jared Allen embracing on the court, almost to say, like, I got your back. So, how true do you think it is that Mitchell will influence the Jared Allen situation this offseason, and how Mitchell's relationship with Bickerstaff could have potentially led to his firing? Because it seems like there's some ruffling of feathers there.
I mean, I think we've talked about this a number of different times on the podcast, Ethan. The minute that the Cavs moved on from JB Bickerstaff, there was a belief around the NBA that the Cavs increased their chances of re-signing Donovan Mitchell, because Donovan and JB didn't view certain things the same kind of way. They didn't have similar goals that aligned with one another, um, and the relationship between them was one where you started to wonder whether Donovan lost confidence and belief in JB, just based on his actions, based on some of his comments, and I think we have to point this out because this is the reality of the situation. Um, JB Bickerstaff was not hired to coach Donovan Mitchell. He was not hired to coach a Donovan Mitchell-led team. And sometimes relationships between players and coaches just don't work. Sometimes it's not a good blend, whether it's personalities, whether it's basketball viewpoints, whether it's things when it comes to how practices are run, how somebody views success versus another person's view of success. Not every coach player pairing is a good fit. That's just the reality of the situation. And I do not believe that JB and Donovan were a good fit. And by the end of it, it felt like one of them was going to have to go, and you know that the Cavs weren't going to choose Donovan as the one to go. He is the most important person in this franchise. It's a players' league. He's going to have a say in everything that is done by the Cavs this offseason if he signs a long-term extension, and he's earned that. That's a level of power that is reserved for, not everybody around the NBA, but guys that have earned that, or guys that are in a situation where they can flex those muscles a little bit. And Donovan certainly is, because the Cavs can't replace him. And because the Cavs aren't a situation where a lot of stars are going to choose to go willingly. So when you have a star, you give him a little bit more power. You give him a little bit more say in the decision making. You incentivize him in any kind of way that you can, within reason, of course, to sign a long-term extension and stay with your organization. And that's what the Cavs have done. So from everything that I've heard, Donovan has signed off on multiple candidates in this coaching search. Donovan is not somebody who's sitting there saying, you need to interview this guy or else. This is the guy that I prefer, more so than anybody else. But the Cavs know, it's in the back of their mind, it's in the front of their mind, however you want to phrase it, that every decision that they're going to make, whether it's coach, whether it's NBA draft, whether it's transaction season, is going to impact Donovan's view of this organization and Donovan's view of this organization and its ability to compete at the highest level. And because they understand that, they are making decisions with Donovan in mind, just as they should. One of those, obviously, being the decision to move on from JB Bickerstaff. I also don't think it's all that surprising that JB made a passive aggressive remark about Luka Doncic, Jared Allen, and the comparison between the two, and one of them playing through it and the other one not playing through it. JB is an old school coach. That's another reason why I don't know that the fit between Donovan and JB was all that great. Um, JB was an old school coach who talked repeatedly ever since he was the head coach that took over for John Beeline about the importance of availability, about playing through injuries, about the 82 game season, and about when he grew up at a time where players weren't dealing with load management decisions, where coaches didn't have to deal with load management decisions. He talked about the old school guys that were playing 82 games in the regular season, and that was like a stamp of of something special for them to go through that. And JB, every time the conversation shifted to, is a guy going to play? Is a guy not going to play? Thoughts on load management, thoughts on getting through the 82 game season. He said every single time, I prefer my guys to play. I prefer my guys to be available. So the fact that he had to coach around Jared Allen for so many games throughout the course of the team's playoff run, obviously that was bothersome to him.
I think it's also interesting just the relationship that JB Bickerstaff seemed to have with Jared Allen throughout the season, because JB was very vocal about saying that throughout the 82 game season, Jared Allen was one of the most dependable guys he had on the court, and even went into the playoffs saying that I can go to bed and sleep easier knowing that I have Jared Allen on the court. So to then go from saying that to not being able to have him is definitely going to have you feeling some type of way in a situation where you need him more than ever. And thinking about what Jared Allen meant to the Cavs throughout the 82 game season, we know that he missed the first 5 games of the season. So then he played the remainder 77 and then also played the first 4 games of the playoffs. So that's 81 straight games if you look at it that way. And you think about how much he impacted each game, especially when Evan Mobley was out, Darius Garland was out, different players were out. You think about Donovan Mitchell was missing time. There was a time where the feeling was, one, Jared Allen has done enough for the team that he should be considered an all-star, because there is no other big doing as much in the league as Jared Allen was at that time for the Cavs in that situation. And I think it's difficult to point out something like that and then shift all the way to throwing a little bit of shade in after you're out of the head coaching role. And I just think it was a little interesting, but I understand your point of view in thinking that he's an old school guy, and he was definitely vocal about that too.
But you're also like crossing viewpoints. I mean, if you think about it, the stuff that you're saying JB was talking about in terms of Jared Allen, like, that was real, that was honest. That's not what he talked about in this appearance on Sirius XM NBA radio. Like, his viewpoint of Jarrett and the impact that he brings on the court, the way that he played defensively, the importance of the role that he had at both ends of the floor, like, that's not in question in any sort of way. There was nobody in the locker room grumbling about that aspect of Jarrett. They were grumbling about the other ones. So we do live in a world, I think, Ethan, where multiple things can be true at the same time. And I don't think JB's overall viewpoint of Jarrett, the basketball player, and the impact that he has on a team winning, I don't think that has changed in any sort of way. I don't think Jarrett's teammates changed that viewpoint in any sort of way. I think if anybody is questioning anything related to Jarrett, it's the other stuff. It's about his ability to play through injury. It's about whether he did everything in his power to get himself back out on the floor. If there was any opportunity for him to play, even at less than 100%, to give something to the team while they're out there. Like that to me is a separate conversation than some of that other stuff that you brought up that JB said about Jarrett, because I believe the things that JB said about Jarrett to be true and to be his honest feelings about he should be in the running for defensive player of the year, about he should get more recognition than what he typically gets. Like all of those things, I believe JB feels. But I also know that there were grumbles behind the scenes about other aspects of Jarrett unrelated to his basketball ability or the impact that he has on winning at both ends of the floor.
No, I get what you're saying. I thought it was interesting because you think about how much Jared was impacting the game, and then you also think about just how hard it was to game plan without Jared. And I think that's what JB Bickerstaff took into it, and maybe took it a little bit too far, but who knows? I think
Well, he
we
didn't
can.
specifically say Jarrett. I think everybody understands who he was alluding to, but he didn't go on the radio and say Jarrett is soft. Jarrett should have done
Right.
this. Jarrett should, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
He was
100%.
he was more praising Luca and his willingness to fight through an injury and be effective and play to the high level that he did during the NBA finals, because I mean I think that's something that kind of got lost on people that were criticizing Luca, is what he was battling through just to make himself available in that series.
Like you said, passive aggressive. But we'll move back over to the coaching search conversation because there's also news coming out about the coaching search around the league, with the Lakers reportedly nearing a deal with JJ Redick, which would then put
No
all.
way.
I mean, not like we have talked about him as being one of the main options over there, but it's fine. But
The
um,
whole world has.
facts. But JJ Redick being reportedly almost a done deal with the Lakers would then put all the chips on the table for the Cavs to have their selection of the best candidate when it comes to maybe James Borrego or Kenny Atkinson. We have talked about the list of candidates that the Cavs have been interested in, and there's even been a sense that the Cavs will make a decision before the NBA draft, which we both talked about on this podcast before. But I wanted to hear it from you. Who do you think is the front runner right now for the position for the next head coach of the Cavs? Do your sources have you leaning in any direction?
Well, first of all, I talked to a source earlier today that said that the Cavs want to interview one or two more candidates before making a final decision. So I do think that is interesting. I also know that the Cavs are a team that typically does its due diligence when it comes to a coaching search. They want it to be wide ranging. They want it to be extensive. Um, they make a bunch of calls to players, to coaches, to executives, anybody that they think would provide any kind of feedback that would be valuable for them, whether it's positive or negative. They just want to know as much as they possibly can about each and every candidate, because this is a process where there are so many uncertainties, there are so many unknowns, there are so many variables. So you try and limit the number of those. You try and make those somehow in your favor. So the more information that you're going to have that you can parse through, the better off you're going to be. So if you think about 5 years ago when the Cavs went through a coaching search, I think it was 12. think it was 12 guys that they interviewed before ultimately landing on John Beeline. There's also the Dan Gilbert variable that always looms in any decision when it comes to the Cavs. It could be the coach, it could be front office, it could be roster decisions. Dan Gilbert looms as a wild card, and everybody around the NBA recognizes that. So I do think they are getting closer. I do think they believe in the candidates that they have met with to this point. I do think they have confidence that one of these guys is going to be the next head coach. And my sense is still that James Borrego is the leader in the clubhouse in this thing. Now, that could change. Things do change quickly in the NBA. Somebody could blow away a bunch of different people involved in this process in an interview. Contract negotiations may not go the way that everybody would want them to go. There are a bunch of different factors that could change that. But it does feel like James Borrego is the leader in the clubhouse. That's the way that it's been phrased to me by multiple sources. I'm told that Donovan Mitchell has indeed given his stamp of approval when it comes to Borrego. I'm told that Donovan has reached out to a number of players that have had interactions with Borrego, either that he has coached or that he knows well from his relationships around the NBA. And it makes a lot of sense from the standpoint that he's considered more of an offensive minded guy. I don't think it would be a deal breaker if it was a defensive minded coach, but it's clear that the Cavs feel like their shortcomings when it comes to this roster had to do with player development, and they had to do with the team's offense, especially in the playoffs. It just wasn't good enough. So they want somebody who can make it more creative, more dynamic. If it's an assistant, it's an assistant. If it's a head coach, even better, because he's going to have more say in how things are done from a systematic standpoint at that end of the floor and at the other end of the floor. So I do think it benefits Borrego when you're weighing all the different pros and cons, and you're looking at all the different traits that he brings to the table. The fact that he is considered more of an offensive guy, the fact that there is a reputation that he runs good stuff, that he did run good stuff in Charlotte, and his issues, the reasons why it didn't work out in Charlotte, weren't so much related to him as they were related to the organization. A disaster of an organization that hasn't figured it out since he left there either. So I think all of those things combine to make him a logical fit for this opening. But just because that's how I feel about the situation, just because that's what my sources seem to indicate, it doesn't mean that somebody couldn't change their viewpoint. It felt like at various points in the previous coaching search that the Cavs went through 5 years ago, that JB Bickerstaff did great in his interviews, just like Borrego did this time, and he blew the Cavs away. And it was going to be his job. And then all of a sudden it's John Beeline's, and then JB finishes runner up, and he's the lead assistant, you know? So there are a lot of factors still in play when it comes to this. But I do believe that Borrego has impressed this organization, and I do believe that they believe he is ready to be a head coach once again.
Yeah, and I think James Borrego is a good candidate as well, just because you look at his track record, and I like to think he might be kind of Eric Spoelstra-esque. I know he's not Chris Quinn, so he's like not like the mini me, but if you look at his storyline, like James Borrego was a video coordinator for the San Antonio Spurs back in the day, back when he was winning championships alongside Craig Popovich back in the day, and learning from Greg and Pop and all of those people, and understanding that, one, Greg Popovich doesn't give praise to a lot of people. So when he says in an interview that James Borrego is perfect at what he was doing, like, that's high praise to the next level. Like, you cannot come by something like that from Greg Popovich. I mean, I sat in on a couple of his press conferences, and it was 1-2 word answers. But I mean, and then you think about what he was able to do and what he was able to learn under the different tutelage of Greg Popovich during his time there. And you mentioned the offensive stuff and being creative, which is definitely something that they got going on there. But you mentioned
I also think it helps him, Ethan, that he has seen the other side of it. That he has seen non San Antonio. Because, sometimes when you're in a situation where everything works and everything is good, and you get into an environment where all of a sudden there's adversity, all of a sudden not every resource is available to you the way that it is in San Antonio. The culture is not the same as it is in San Antonio. You don't necessarily know how to handle that. And I think the fact that he had to deal with something different than San Antonio, something not as established as San Antonio, the way that he did in Charlotte and Orlando during his brief stint there, I do think that helps him to see it done a different way. He knows what success looks like, and he knows what failure looks like, and he knows kind of what things to avoid to have success in a different environment, because he learned all of that from his other stops. So, like, it would concern me a little bit more from a Cavs perspective, honestly, if he was just. I think that's part of the reason why some players um, don't have that much success, or at least the history of players moving on from Miami and having success elsewhere is very, very small. And Max Strus has done a really good job of changing that viewpoint. I don't know if one guy is going to completely change it, but the way that he has played here in Cleveland, the impact that he has had for the Cavs certainly helps change that kind of reputation. But there's a reason why that reputation exists, because not everybody is Miami. And if you leave Miami and you go to Orlando or Charlotte or Cleveland, things aren't done the same kind of way. Things aren't put in place the same kind of way. Things aren't established the same kind of way. The structure is different. You know what I mean? So I think it's the same kind of thing when it comes to San Antonio. All of a sudden you're away from pop. All of a sudden you're away from stability. All of a sudden you're away from structure and organization and all that kind of stuff that has been synonymous with the Spurs for so many years. And you have to see a different kind of way, and you learn what doesn't work just as much as in San Antonio you learn what does work. And I think the fact that he had another stop along the journey where he did fail, and he did have to learn from that, and he did see something different. I think that's beneficial coming to the Cavs.
And Chris, you mentioned something kind of interesting when it comes to the coaching search and what happened 5 years ago and what's also happened before, because we know the Cavs have made switches during the season before for guys that they had as the number two assistant when it comes to Ty Lue as well.
Hmm.
But do you think with the JJ Redick hiring for the Lakers potentially, it's still not dry ink. We don't want to say anything that feels confirmed yet, but do you think with that potentially happening, the Cavs have a better chance of signing two head coach worthy candidates and keeping another one on as an assistant? Or do you think that the Lakers could potentially keep one of those guys on as an assistant with a better chance because of the just being able to help at a first-hand basis with JJ
Hmm.
in his first season?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the Cavs have shown throughout the last decade or so, Ethan, that they're willing to pay for a coach. They're willing to pay for the right staff. And if that means overpaying for an assistant based on what is most common for a lead assistant, they're willing to do that because they respect the job title so much. And if there's one thing that we have seen from the Lakers is that um, they don't seem to value the head coaching spot the same kind of way. They certainly aren't willing to pay the head coaching spot the same kind of way. They quote unquote lowballed Ty Lue. They quote unquote lowballed Dan Hurley based on what the initial reports were. It was very, very different. It was very similar to the kind of contract that he's working out with Connecticut. So they just don't seem to be an organization that is willing to go that next step to secure whether it's a head coach or a top assistant. Maybe they look at the situation, if it's going to be JJ Redick, and say, hey, look, this guy has never been a head coach at any level. If we're going to set him up for success, we better find somebody with a bunch of NBA experience to be his right hand man. We better find the Ty Lue to his David Blatt, the way that the Cavs did when they brought David Blatt from overseas. Maybe the Lakers look at it that kind of way, and it changes how they operate. And they do try and bring James Borrego as the lead assistant, or Kenny Atkinson as the lead assistant, or Chris Quinn. They try and lure him away from Miami, or whatever the situation may be. That is certainly something that is a possibility, and I think the Cavs, in some ways, will be competing for some of those same candidates. But the Cavs typically have paid, and this is an alluring spot on its own because this is a team that went to the Eastern Conference semifinals. This is a team that has a lot of good pieces in place to compete in the Eastern Conference. This is a team that doesn't hold back when it comes to the resources afforded to the head coach or to the front office when it comes to building it the right way. Going into the luxury tax is something that Dan Gilbert has shown a willingness to do. So I do think there are benefits to this job itself, both for a head coach and a lead assistant. And if we follow history, I do believe that there are dots that can be connected, that one of these guys that the Cavs interviewed during this process that doesn't get the head coaching job will be offered the lead assistant job if James Borrego is comfortable enough, if Kenny Atkinson is comfortable enough, if Chris Quinn, Mike Nori, whoever it is that ends up being the head coach is comfortable enough with that kind of setup. I do think that is a distinct possibility. In fact, I would not be surprised if that's the way it ends up. It could be Dave Yeager, to be honest with you.
That's interesting. That's interesting. But Chris, we had a conversation yesterday about two-way wings, and I got curious to see what fans would have wanted, and maybe I should have reeled that curiosity back in because we definitely got some comments on what I went and did. But I went and set up a poll for our subtexters that listed a few names of potential options for the Cavs to pursue this offseason. And here are the results. Mikal Bridges, 54%. OG Anunoby, 26%. Jimmy Butler, 10%. And Paul George, 10%. I will admit, as soon as I set this poll out, I thought about Brandon Ingram and his viability. And he's definitely someone I should have put on this poll, but there were a couple subtexters that were upset with me and the selections that I put on here, especially talking about Jimmy Butler and Paul George because of their age. Let me read you this one response. It's a bit confusing, so stick with me. Not surprising, you recommending yet another unathletic player. Please stop with the old guys, Butler, George. The object is to win a championship. You don't win championships with a Max Strus starting. Wow. Wade, Strus, Merrill, and Philippe? You're kidding. Do you have the foresight to recommend players that have toughness? Championships, nothing else. Wow. was my initial response to that message.
Well, he told you.
Yeah, got on me good, Chris. Got on me good. But I just think that there are fans that forget the value of players like Paul George and Jimmy Butler. And that's crazy for me to say. Like, sure, they're getting up to 34, 35 now. Have they won a championship? No. But lack of toughness shouldn't be something that is considered for Jimmy Butler specifically. We all remember him hunched over from playing heavy minutes in the 2020 NBA Finals against the Lakers, right? And when it comes to Paul George, I mean, He may not be as athletic as he was when he was on the Indiana Pacers, but he's
Mm.
still one of the smoothest players in the league. To quote Jimmy Watkins, one of our guests on the show, he plays the beautiful game. And that's might be an understatement for his game. He's also coming off his best field goal percentage and 3-point percentage of his career this past season, Chris. It's not even talking about just
Mm.
numbers and scoring, but his efficiency with age is something that you want to see go up, not down. And that's what Paul
Yeah.
George is doing. And the other complaint that I got for this poll was that the options didn't seem realistic. So I wanted to ask you, based on contracts and fit with the team, out of BI, PG, Jimmy, OG, and Macau, which player do you think is the most realistic for the Cavs to pursue this offseason?
Well, I usually look at it this way, and I totally understand that there are 3 team trades available. There are 4 team trades available. There are other teams that can be brought in that can satisfy another team's needs. So if you don't have the proper fits in terms of assets, you can still find a way. But when it comes to evaluating whether a deal is realistic, I look at what the Cavs have to give up in order to get that caliber player and how much of a fit is it with the other team's roster construction currently, right? So if we're talking about Paul George, I don't find that realistic unless a third or fourth team is brought into the equation, right? Because if you think about what the Cavs have to give up, the 2 most attractive pieces that they have to give up that they'd actually be willing to part with, it's Darius Garland and Jarrett Allen. And it doesn't mean that the Cavs are willing to part with those guys. And it doesn't mean that the Cavs are saying we need to trade either one of them to get better as an organization. But when you're talking about the core 4, those 2 would be the quote unquote most expendable because Donovan's not going anywhere. And we all know how this organization feels about Evan Mobley. Well, Donovan's not going anywhere if he signs long term. So Darius Garland and Jarrett Allen would be one of those 2 guys would be the centerpiece of a trade for one of these guys that you bring up, right? Well, Jarrett Allen doesn't make all the sense for the Los Angeles Clippers when they have invested in Zubac, and he's a starting caliber center, and they still have James Harden. So, do they really have a need for Darius Garland? Again, they could make other moves. They could trade James Harden elsewhere. They could free up a spot that way. Da 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 da. We understand that. Just like when you're putting together the framework, the Clippers, there's not like a great match there, right? So then you start going down the next one. There is a match with the New Orleans Pelicans and Brandon Ingram because New Orleans has shown interest in Jarrett Allen in the past, because New Orleans has some Darius Garland admirers there, because New Orleans could use a point guard like Darius. He could play alongside CJ McCollum. He could be a guy who gives them a different dimension offensively. He could take some pressure off of Zion so that Zion doesn't have to be the initiator and the finisher. He could do some things down in New Orleans that are logical from a fit standpoint, especially with a spaced out team that has some shooting around him and some defense around him too to mask some of his deficiencies. And then Jarrett Allen, obviously, they're looking for a better fitting center next to Zion. Jared is somebody that the Cavs and Pelicans have talked about in the past. Those conversations didn't go anywhere, but New Orleans expressed enough interest in him. So I think there's a fit there just based on what could be a potential framework. I also think there's a fit in New York. If OG is not going to get the kind of contract that he wants from New York, then I think there could be a sign and trade opportunity. And if you think about New York, no, they don't really need Darius Garland. That's obvious. They have Jalen Brunson. He's the engine of that offense. But Jared Allen? different kind of situation, right? Mitchell Robinson's been injury prone. Isaiah Hartenstein is probably going to cash in free agency. He might be priced out of the range of the Knicks. So the Knicks would be looking at a situation of either lose OG Anunoby because we're not willing to meet his asking price, or try and recoup a positive asset in return. And I do think there's a general framework of Jared Allen, OG Anunoby, and there would have to be other stuff included, especially if OG is going to want a massive contract like it seems like he's going to want. But there's a general framework in place that is logical there. I don't know that I see that with Miami right now, because they have Bam, because they have Tyler Hero, because they have Terry Rozier. That's not to say that Miami wouldn't take somebody like Darius Garland in a potential trade. I think Miami would see the value in somebody like Darius, the kind of playmaker that he is, the kind of shooter that he is. Um, but I don't know that that's the most logical one in there. So that's how I view it, Ethan. I think part of it is, yes, the caliber of player that the Cavs would be trying to acquire, but the other part of it is what they have that would satisfy the other team's wants in a potential trade. And it has to be a fit from that standpoint. And some of those, obviously, I think are better than others. So I would put my eyes toward New York with OG and toward New Orleans with Brandon Ingram. But that's not to say that the Cavs would say yes to either one of those deals, because, like I said, they have placed a high price tag on both Jarrett or Darius, and I think they'd have to be blown away by an offer for either one of those guys. And Mikal Bridges, I mean, the Nets seem hell bent on keeping him, and it appears that they are turning down massive offers for Bridges, and he was the centerpiece of the KD deal, right? Like, that was the guy that they got back for KD. So if you want him, you're going to have to overpay by a large degree, and I don't know that the Cavs are in position to do that for somebody like Mikal Bridges.
Yeah, Chris, and I think that's all to say that things are going to get interesting, because once things start falling into place with Donovan Mitchell and the coaching search, then I think you get a little bit more clarity about the direction that the Cavs are going to go, especially with the draft coming up. And we are going to start getting into episodes that regard who we think could potentially be players that the Cavs would want to go get, and who can make an impact out of this draft class for the Cavs immediately, if there is anybody in this draft class. But that's for another day. And with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. Yes, if there is any news that comes out this week, I bet you're going to get it first through Subtext. So to get this information, sign up for a 14-day free trial, or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.